Yeah, so this talk is about BUCC and getting started with single-tenant Cloud Foundry. And I'm Ruben Koster. So yeah, I work for Stark & Wayne as a cloud architect, I think. Stark & Wayne is a, what do we do? Cloud Foundry, cloud native consultancy firm. That's what we're doing. So we've been in the Cloud Foundry ecosystem for a long time. We're experts on BOSH and Cloud Foundry, and we have a lot of open source projects that enhance or augment Cloud Foundry. This talk was also made possible by Packet. Packet does bare metal cloud, so you can use an API to get a bare metal server. I will explain more about why that's relevant later. So yeah, let's start out with the first part of the title, BUCC. So what's BUCC? BUCC is an open source project, Stark & Wayne /GitHub, or no, GitHub/Stark & Wayne/BUCC. That's where you can find it. We have actually quite a lot of commits. Most of that is our CI pipeline that continuously integrates and tests the different components of BUCC. The components of BUCC, what are those? So BUCC is actually an opinionated wrapper around BOSH create-env. So you can use the BUCC CLI to do a BUCC-up, which calls BOSH create-env, which will create a BUCC, a capital BUCC, which is an acronym for BOSH, UAA, Credhub, and Concourse. These technologies work really well together, and we have integrated, so they have a lot of integration points, and we have integrated those in the best possible way, or in an opinionated way, like the way we think it's best to integrate those. And that's actually a great starting point to start deploying a Cloud Foundry, right? So we get a BUCC, and then we go from there, basically. Oh, and now I need to go back. Oh, wait, the arrow works? Yeah, okay. Single-tenant Cloud Foundry. Yeah, what do we mean with that? So, to me, a single-tenant Cloud Foundry is a Cloud Foundry used by a single company. The users are trustworthy. You know who they are. You can go to their desk and complain about the stuff they did on your platform. I don't know, this is a bit random, but it's in the single-digit terabyte range. So it's not those big service provider clouds we're talking about here. It's the smaller Cloud Foundry deployments. And why that's relevant is because at this scale, you don't want too much overhead for your management plane, right? You don't want all sorts of different VMs just to have your infrastructure to start deploying Cloud Foundry. So it's better to have that integrated, right? So yeah, let's look at some options. This is actually also a bit of a history lesson about BUCC and how we started. And these features are still supported and in there, but we have evolved the project to have more scope. We will end with our latest and greatest research, basically. So yeah, BUCC-up, you specify a CPI. It's all basically built on top of BOSH deployment. We consume that, the ops files there, and we take those files together and inject it in, or feed it to BOSH create-env, which does the magic of creating a VM from nothing. So you will end up with one VM on your infrastructure of choice, and then you can start deploying your Cloud Foundry. But if you know BOSH a bit, you need a cloud config to describe your networks and the different types of VMs, like what sizes they are, and network extensions around like load balancers, ingress, networks. So all that stuff is not taken care of, right? So you still have to think about that. So that makes it harder to get started with Cloud Foundry because you have to think about boring stuff. So yeah, we can do better. There's a project called BOSH Bootloader. It's pronounced Bubble, BBL. Bubble has it's a wrapper around Terraform, so it has opinionated ways of setting up the pieces that BOSH doesn't manage, right? So bootstrapping your load balancers and your networks and those things. If you would use Bubble up, we have actually support in BUCC for Bubble, but then you would call Bubble, which would call Terraform, apply, which creates all the infrastructure. Then it will call BOSH create env to create a jump box. Then it will call BUCC up with a CPI of your choice, and then it will create the BUCC, as we can see on the right side. And a nice feature of Bubble is that it will also update your cloud config, right? So at this point, you can directly start deploying your Cloud Foundry because BOSH has all the information it needs. So that's nice, actually. But what about, we want to optimize for cost, right? Because it's a smaller deployment, and this is creating actually quite a lot of VMs. And there's a lot of buzz nowadays about containerize everything, so we need containers, right? Yeah, we do need that. So yeah, there's an option for that. We can do BUCC up and then specify -- light, which will use the Garden CPI. The Garden CPI, so Garden is the containerization technology of Cloud Foundry. And a CPI is a cloud provider interface. That's a feature of BOSH. So the way BOSH talks to different types of clouds is by having this cloud provider interface abstraction. What this does is instead of creating VMs, it creates containers. So you end up with one big BUCC VM with a Cloud Foundry inside there. That's nice for development purposes. You can have a Cloud Foundry running in a single VM, but it doesn't really scale, right? You need some sort of way of going multi-node, spread your containers across multiple nodes. And that's why you need a scheduler. Okay, let's see. We can do Bubble up, then do Terraform apply and the whole thing. Then we can use BOSH to deploy Kubo, which is a distribution of Kubernetes using BOSH. And then we can use Helm with the CF operator to install a containerized Cloud Foundry inside the Kubo. But then I don't know, it's becoming quite complex. But it's probably doable, I think. It's lots of layers, right? And you could say, yeah, we can go for a managed Kubernetes. Yeah, you can do that. Problem is there's complexity. There's still complexity. And by making complexity someone else's problem, it's not getting rid of the complexity, right? It's just making someone else's problem and instead pay them for dealing with that complexity. So yeah, I was thinking, can we actually do something else? What would a minimal viable product look like, right? What do we actually need? We want CF in containers, right? But the Docker CPI actually does that quite well. We need some way for these different containers running on different hosts to connect to each other. And that's actually something Kubernetes in Kubernetes, they use Flannel a lot for that, just an overlay network. We don't need any management of IP addresses and stuff. BOSH can do that fine. It just needs to have that connectivity across the nodes. So that makes it simple. Yeah, container placement. I'm calling it placement, not scheduling, because we just want to deal with the life cycle on different hosts of containers. And we want to be able to update those and take action if they are gone. And for that, we can actually use BOSH multi-CPI, in which we can have different availability zones mapped to a different instance of the cloud provider. And then for service discovery, that's built in BOSH nowadays, we have BOSH DNS, so everything can find each other. And for ingress, actually Docker port forwarding works just fine. We can map it to an IP address and a port, and yeah. So with this in mind, we actually came up with this thing. For this, we are actually using Packet, but this can work on any bare metal installation. Bare metal or Packet just does bare metal as a service, so it was easier for us to test. We can use Terraform to set this all up. And in here we're using CoreOS. CoreOS, the reason we are using CoreOS is because it has 3 things we need, which is Docker, and it has Flannel, and Flannel needs etcd, right? So we need an etcd cluster. So we just have an etcd cluster, but it's not really keeping state, it's just some configuration, distributed configuration. We are not using it like to keep state, so it's not, we don't have to care about it that much. And for Flannel, we actually did a thing where we made the subnets static. So we are not letting Flannel hand out subnets, we're defining them up front so that we can let BOSH deal with allocating the IP addresses. And on there, we deploy a containerized BUCC, and then we can deploy a containerized Cloud Foundry in Docker. And that's the theory behind all of this. And now I'm gonna go over the getting started part of the talk. This was all like the context, right? It's because it's all about getting to a point where it's easy to start deploying the Cloud Foundry, and where you want to, and the Cloud Foundry is the thing that's gonna change a lot, right? We have weekly releases almost, and if you want to do open source Cloud Foundry, you need to be able to have a pipeline, you actually need a pipeline to apply those updates. So we will use this foundation layer, basically, as the basis on which we will deploy a Dockerized version of, or containerized version of Cloud Foundry. Yes. Demo. Yes, okay. Please ask questions. I've done this stuff a lot, so if I go too quickly, please say so. Let me first go out of here. We have this bare metal cluster running of 3 big nodes. It's actually, later today, there's a hands-on lab session, and tomorrow also, where we will actually be using this bare metal cluster. It's 3 nodes and a total memory of, 1,100 gigs of RAM. So it's quite a big cluster. And on the first node, we have configured CoreOS to automatically, on boot up, deploy a BUCC, right? So after the Terraform apply, we actually already have a BUCC. And we can just do a BUCC shell command, which will start a Docker container with the BUCC configuration, because BUCC has generated secrets for your BOSH, a password for your BOSH and your Credhub and all those things. And BUCC actually has all sorts of wrapper or helper functions that you can use to easily configure your CLIs. So for example, I can do BUCC Credhub, and then we'll install the Credhub CLI and authenticate it with this given BUCC. And I can do now things like Credhub find, and then name. The name is Concourse main. And the reason why I'm looking at Concourse main is because this is another feature of Concourse. Concourse is able to look up variables in a given credential or secret store. And we have configured it to look up things in Credhub. And so on the BUCC up, it will actually populate, we import credentials on boot into Credhub so that we can directly start pipelining by just using, for example, the BOSH CA cert, right? That variable, we can directly use that in a pipeline. We don't have to deal, it's secure by default, basically. There's another command, which is BUCC info, which gives you is that going to work, or do we have to control click it? Right click. Control click? Yes. And then advanced, I think. It's a self-signed, so Concourse is running with a self-signed certificate, so that's why I have to do this. I have to take all the responsibility for the risks. But I know what I'm doing, I think. And I need to switch back to the terminal, get the password. Yes, Control C. Yeah, so this is not my laptop, and I usually use a Mac, and I'm now on Ubuntu. But my
Double tap on the password in the shell.
Ah, okay, thanks. Wait. This is awkward. Double tap. Okay, and then I can just Control V. Two-finger tap. Wait. This is awkward. Right-click, copy. We're going to do it this way, right? Now everybody knows what we're doing. Paste. Huh? Right? That works. Yeah, actually for the hands-on labs, we're going to deploy a lot of Cloud Foundries on this bare metal thing because bare metal is actually crazy fast. So we're just going to deploy a whole bunch. I will delete all this before the lab, but I was, I don't know, was working on getting this all working. So yeah. But yeah, so what we can do here, so we have a pipeline here, and that pipeline, so we can just use BUCC fly. Yeah. So BUCC fly. So fly is the CLI of Concourse, right? So with the fly CLI, let me get that YAML file from the hands-on labs. So this is actually the pipeline. So in Concourse, you need a manifest to YAML manifest, which defines your whole pipeline. So let me quickly get that from GitHub. What? Why? But why? Okay. Okay, let's not go into that. So this works, copy paste, and then yes, to a file, pipeline.yaml. Yeah, so I can just do a fly-t BUCC. The target is BUCC. It says so in the example or in the output, and then I can do set pipeline -p pipeline name cf. I don't know. Yeah, demo. It's fine. Yeah, thank you. I have such helpful colleagues. Yes, co-speakers. Yeah. And I think I need to provide a variable. But wait, no, I can try it this way. Why doesn't that exist? Oh, it's called pipeline. Thanks. Yes. Sorry, that was what. And now, yeah. So we're missing this prefix. So there are variables in there, but I also need a prefix to supply that. So let me do this, and then fly -t. No. I know something. Right? I like this because help, and then you can just do set pipeline help. I mean, this is how I usually work. I don't know all this stuff, so I just or don't remember it, right? But it's actually useful to see, right? So we can supply, so the syntax with a double bracket, that's a variable, and that will be interpolated. So if you don't provide it, it will try to look it up in Credhub, but I know the prefix is not set there, so I have to provide it now when I do the set pipeline. And I can do that with a variable here. So I can do -- var equals prefix equals cf01. I think that's going to work. So now we can see that it's the change the system domain, right? So that's where it's interpolated now. It's a German keyboard. I think it's, yes, that's the one. Okay, so now we have updated this pipeline definition, and it actually provides us with a nice link, which I needed to double, no, what, how do I click it? Right click, control click? Yes, control click. So by default it's paused, right, so it's blue. Okay, we have it twice now, so I can start it, and then I can kick off the pipeline here, and this will go start deploying everything. So now I will actually go over the pipeline definition, because we all believe that it's going to deploy something. But yeah, because I think an important aspect of deploying Cloud Foundry and getting started with Cloud Foundry is understanding your Concourse pipeline, because that's actually where this whole pipeline is self-contained, and it's not that big. So if you understand this pipeline, you know how to operate a Cloud Foundry, more or less, right? Until stuff doesn't work, and you have to go dive in and understand BOSH and go into VMs and debug, or VMs, in this case it will be containers. I can show that later. So yeah, one big, actually what we are using here is an important piece that's right at the bottom. That's the BOSH deployment resource, which there's a link to here. So there's a built-in BOSH deployment resource in Concourse, but this is the new one that supports ops files. Ops files is a way of having extensions on a BOSH manifest. So you have a base manifest for CF deployment. Let me actually open that up. So Cloud Foundry, and then there's CF deployment. This is the main repo where like the open source Cloud Foundry is integrated. So the release engineering team will publish new releases, new versions here. And what does that mean? It means that we have new versions of this CF deployment file. This is the really important BOSH manifest of how to deploy a canonical Cloud Foundry. And we don't go over that now, but just know that it exists. And ops files are basically feature flags or something. So it's a way of knowing how, or defining how to make changes to a certain manifest to enable a certain new feature. So there's workarounds, but also things like, OpenStack scale to 1AZ. That's, for example, something we're using here. But also experimental stuff. So like features that are not there or that are being worked on, but can be tested, but are not production ready, you can find in experimental. And all that is combined actually here, right? So what we do, we say which manifest to use. So get CF deployment is just a Git pull, basically. We use a Git resource to get the CF deployment repo, and we make sure that's a stable one by using tag filters. We get the stem cell and this ops file, but I will go over that later. That's our own changes that we make to this. But yeah, so we're just specifying use CF deployment and use all these types of ops files to make changes to this base manifest. So for example, use compiled releases. Compiled releases is a way of, in BOSH, you have the compilation phase where it tries to compile the source code into a binary. But we have compiled releases which are published by the CI of the release engineering team, which will skip that phase. So it's for a certain stem cell version, they publish a compiled release which allows you to speed up your deployment. Yeah, and use Postgres, scale to 1AZ, a bunch of things we do here in this particular instance to make it like really fast and look fancy. And then there's vars, right? This is variables again. So here, because we are deploying multiple instances of Cloud Foundry, we have to change the deployment name. Normally, you would only have to supply a system domain. So that's the one variable you actually need to supply. So that's the system domain, the DNS name on where the wildcard DNS record where your instance will be running or reachable. So you have to configure the DNS yourself. BOSH is not doing that, but routes will be announced on that domain. Yeah, so that's actually all there is to deploying a Cloud Foundry from CF deployment. This is just defining where to get the CF deployment from, and this ops file is, we use a file resource to have an inline ops file so that this whole pipeline is self-contained, but we needed to make some changes to make it run on Docker, right? So this is just hackery that maybe we could like even upstream this and get this into CF deployment, into a proper ops file. But for us to be able to iterate fast, we were doing it inline in this pipeline. And this here is where we define what this BOSH deployment thing is, right? Here we say, or this deploy task or resource. Here we define the deployment name and we look up the credentials for the BOSH, right? That's what I showed earlier. We did the Credhub find and then we saw all the credentials that were injected into Credhub by BUCC during the BOSH create env. And here, this is why we do that, because this gives us a simple way of looking up those credentials. It will, by default, will look in Concourse main, because main is the default team in Concourse. So that's the path where it expects these variables to exist. Yeah, that's it. The deployment succeeded. It took 9 minutes, okay. Yeah, that's it. We can, I can do a BOSH instances. So we have, in this BUCC shell, we have also the BUCC CLI, which we can use to do instances, and then -d for deployment, and that was CF -01. Was it? Maybe I called, no, I think I don't know, deployments. That's not that readable, but we can pipe it into less. So there's CF02. So here we can actually see all the releases that were used. So the releases that BOSH uses are defined in the BOSH manifest. So when they publish a new version of the CF deployment, there will be new versions. And here you can actually see which versions of every component you are running. So that's quite nice. And which stem cell to use, or you are using, which is also defined in the manifest. We just go to one. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's it. How much time do I have left? None, right? Or 2 minutes, so that's actually good. Questions? Oh, I think I have slides for that. Yeah, want to learn more? We have BUCC. We have, Molten Core. We're gonna open source this, this project around setting up a Core OS cluster to do these types of things. We're gonna open source it. We came up with a name. We're thinking of calling it Molten Core. Watch your blog for announcements around that. And bare metal as a service, go to packet.com and you can use the discount code to get $100 credit. Which is actually quite much because these servers you pay like, I think for the 30 gig model you pay $40 per hour. So you can actually do quite a bit of experimentation for this money. Yeah, questions? Yes?
Maybe we can pass on. Is this their headphone mic? Good. So that will come out better in the recording then.
Good. Since this is a 101 session, I have a couple of very elementary questions.
Yes, please.
Is BUCC required or is it optional?
For deploying Cloud Foundry?
For deploying Cloud Foundry?
Yeah, so you only need the BOSH aspect of Cloud Foundry. or of BUCC. So BOSH is the thing that deploys Cloud Foundry. BOSH nowadays is usually configured with UAA authentication, so it often is deployed alongside UAA. It's not strictly needed. And then Credhub is also quite useful to have nowadays, because if you're not using Credhub, where are you going to store your credentials, right? Because a lot of, so we have variable definitions in a BOSH deployment manifest where this, it's defined how the certificates are generated, which domain names to use and stuff like that. And those are generated on deploy. And they are stored in Credhub. For example, if you configure BOSH to do that, you can also store that in a YAML file, but then you have to deal with that YAML file, so it's better to use a secret manager for that. And then Concourse, yeah, you can do without it, but we really like the pipeline aspect, right? Because you want to keep watching for new, it's not a one-time thing, right? It's basically a weekly thing.
Okay, so I probably misunderstood. So BUCC itself is not an entity.
No,
it's just
it's
an
a distribution
abbreviation for 4 different pieces of Cloud Foundry.
Yeah, of the management plane, of one of the management planes, I have to say that because when you look into the whole deploy things on Kubernetes story, the project Quarks, that's not using BOSH, right? So up until recently, yes, you need all these pieces. Now there is also the native Kubernetes story that's being explored. But this is actually using the native, the prior pieces, and using that to do a containerized Cloud Foundry as well, right? So this is containerized Cloud Foundry without using any of the Kubernetes stuff, right? So it's just using components that we already had and reusing them in a different way. And also that part, this BUCC thing will also work just as well on a GCP environment with VMs, right? This was the...
Okay, when you say this BUCC thing,
yeah.
What does that refer to?
So BOSH deployment is basically, BOSH deployment is hard. If you want to do BOSH deployment out of the box, it's pretty hard to deploy. So we created a BUCC wrapper, so it's easy to, yeah, everyone can understand me, really loud.
No, but it's for the recording. It's for the recording.
So, yeah, what we did was with BUCC, you could just easily deploy a BOSH. So from there on, you can deploy a Cloud Foundry or anything you want.
Mm-hmm. There are a lot of choices you can make in this process to getting to that initial point, right? So we wanted to make have an opinionated way of do these things, and so that we don't have to think about this every time we go deploy this. And this is actually. That's why I said the single-tenant Cloud Foundry thing, right? We made choices that make sense for smaller scale deployments. We at Stark and Wayne also have the whole, we have another project called Genesis, and that's more for geared towards the like big service provider clouds where you have like multiple Cloud Foundries and you want like whole processes of when to update when, or a pipeline where you first update this Cloud Foundry, then that one, that. So a QA, dev, no, not that order. The other way around, first dev, then QA, and production, right? If you have those types of pipelines, we have a product for that as well. This is more smaller scale deployments. You don't have all that overhead. Then it makes sense to have a single unit where your whole management plane is basically in one single unit, which is well integrated.
Does that answer your question? No?
Let's talk later.
No one else?
Applause?
Yeah.